So welcome everyone to the next workshop in this curious setting, which will be held by Anya Lotte Kastelitz, and it's called Demystifying EDU-LARP. It will be a bit strange, I guess, to speak in a microphone during a workshop. I'm sorry about that, but this is the way we can invite more people to join us. So feel free in front of your screens to also go along with the invitations of Anya. Enjoy.
Thank you. Yes, it is weird to speak in the microphone. Okay. So welcome to the workshop. It is Demystifying EDU-LARP because with this workshop the aim is to sort of help understand what EDU-LARP is, what it can be, and how you can make an EDU-LARP for yourself. Yes, so hi, I'm Anya Lotte Kastelitz and I'm a product of an EDU-LARP. And you can see I'm totally not traumatized. It's a bit of a joke. It was an intense LARP, EDU-LARP, where I was a leader. And it was also actually quite fun. I don't know how this picture came to be. But anyhow, have you ever played a game before? You can raise your hands. Good, okay, so we have people who have played games before. That's a good start. Have you ever played an educational game before? It does count if you found the game educational, yeah.
I'm not really sure it was intended to be like that.
Yeah?
That was the result of it.
Sort of, okay. That's good enough for now. And have you ever LARPed before? Okay. Okay, so now we can go into the fact that if you have LARP before, you know that this is a moment when you run. When a bunch of Vikings is storming towards you. But hey, they're actually learning because this is from an EDU-LARP. So their storming towards us was actually educational for them. So what is EDU-LARP? Of course, every LARP can be found educational, because you can learn a lot about yourself, and even in the previous workshop where they were talking about the educational aspects of non-educational LARPs, they have figured out that yes, a lot of it is educational by itself. But something that really sets apart the educational LARPs from non-educational LARPs or just normal LARPs is the fact that you have educational goals specifically designed. So let's go deeper into that. Have you ever played an EDU-LARP? No?
Well, not with the education.
Okay. Have you ever heard of someone or like spoke to someone who was on EDU-LARPs? Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. So I see that, so this is basically just for me to sort of understand what sort of audience you are and how deep we can go. So the first question I want to sort of demystify is why LARP for educational purposes. As you can see, it sort of is under the umbrella of adventure-based learning and learning by doing because it's a very hands-on approach. The biggest reasons for me are listed on there. So first of all, it's a very immersive game and it links to embodiment, which is nowadays, I'm not going to say a new thing in psychology, but it is very much picking up of, it's sort of a trend now to talk about how you feel, how your body feels, and how can you embody certain things. And in the LARP, it really helps because it deals with all of your senses at once. It's not just like a video game where you have like a screen in front of you. It's all around you, and it's happening everywhere, so it's very engaging because of this. It's very good for creating emotions. As any LARP is, usually. And emotions, as also research shows, is really good it's really good for memory and learning. Then a LARP can also offer a safe space. This is a very important aspect when you're making an EDU-LARP happen, because it can enable you to explore and actually fail. In LARPs, we usually, at least the ones that I'm from, and I'm often in EDU-LARPs, we embrace failure and failing. We even have workshops on it before the game. If you know the game, I failed. Do you know the game? No. So it's basically a sort of a improvisational, not really game, You stand in a circle, and to each person that is, so to another person, you just say, name 5 trees or something, and they have to name them really fast. Of course, they're gonna fail, or at least hopefully they will fail. And when that inevitably happens, they have to step into the circle and say, I have failed, like really proudly. And that really helps with creating this safe space for exploration and just saying, hey, it's okay. You don't need to pretend you always know what you're doing. Another big aspect of why LARPing is a really good educational tool is community, because it really binds you together. If you know the feeling when you go to a journey or like a travel with your friends and you come back full of cool stories, this is what usually happens during a LARP as well. So you like to talk about it, and it creates this very deep bonds in a very different way than usually. There is usually no small talk before you jump into a role with someone. You often meet people in the role, and then afterwards you already have something in common to talk about, so it's a really bonding experience. One really important thing for me is that distance enables reflection. When you are in LARP, you probably know that already, you distinguish between in character and out of character. And when you go inside of character, you of course experience things, but when you go out of character, it also enables you to feel, to be more distant toward what happened, and you can look at it from an outside perspective, and you can say, oh, wasn't it cool when they robbed me, or something like it. You know, it usually doesn't happen if it actually happens to you in real life. You wouldn't really say it's cool, but in LARP, you can look at it from a distance, and definitely you can analyze it much easier. And of course, it's exciting, and excitement is what drives today, I think, a lot of people. And it's fun if you're doing something fun, so let's do fun things, which is LARP. LARP can also target a lot of different topics. It can go from climate crisis to racism, xenophobia, de-radicalization, practical and hard skills building, homophobia, bullying, poverty, etc. There are so many different things. Even you can do things with firefighters, or you can use edu-LARPs to build soft skills in business. It doesn't need to be just aimed at youth and like with typical educational purposes. It can be whichever aspect of it you want to do. So how do you design edu-LARPs? Let's go deeper into that. So first of all, you have building blocks of every LARP, and this was taken from LARP Alchemy training course organized by Nausicaa in Poland. It is a very educational training course, and I'm borrowing this schematic because I find it really, really useful. It's really simple. Basically, the building blocks of a LARP, there are story. Do we know what story is? Can we name an element of a story in LARP? The what? The bad guy. That can also be a part of a story, yes. But the story here is sort of, we will go deeper into this later on, but the story here also signifies, as far as I understand it, the environment as well, because the environment can communicate something to you. So basically this is the communication of the main aspect that you're trying to reach, or the main setting and everything like that. The next one is mechanics. Mechanics are the rules that make the LARP work, essentially. It's not the hard rules as in don't actually steal from people or don't do something stupid, but they are actually the rules that are, I call it the physics of the world. Then we have characters, obviously. Without characters, you can hardly have a LARP usually, because it's called a live action role-playing. And then you have production. Production value basically refers to how you're making things happen in the space, in the room, and so on. So when you figure out what LARP is and how to make it, the building blocks, you come to your educational aims. So from educational game theory, you can usually have three different, let's call it three different aspects or aims. The first one is to build skills or competences. It's a very broad one. We can go much deeper in later. Then the second one is giving knowledge. You can build people's knowledge. An example of this would be like a history reenactment or a history LARP, for example, where you would use actual facts. So people would learn things about that. And then the third one is raising awareness. You can help people feel how it is let's say, how it is to be disabled or something like it, which is a very fine thing. You're not usually able to get into that much in other aspects of life. So if you're not actually disabled. So LARP is a very good tool for all of these three things. When it comes to approaches to making, yeah?
Is it always, is that the logical structure of it?
Wait, let me see if the mic extends to you. Okay.
Is that the logic? Is that the logical structure in which it goes? Because in my head, usually you need to like create the awareness and then to give the knowledge, because you have the context of why you need these skills. Like the skills come later.
Yeah, this is a really good comment. It is usually intertwined, but when you're setting educational goals, sometimes it helps to be very specific. So sometimes, at least this is all from my personal experience, by the way, I often find it very helpful to sort of understand what I'm trying to do, what's my primarily like the goal that I'm trying to achieve. Because often these things obviously mix. Because if you try to raise awareness, you also build usually skills of empathy and skills of the very specific thing you're trying to raise awareness in. So definitely they do mix a lot of times, but setting a target on one of them is usually quite helpful. At least this is something I learned through video game design. And I think it is also applicable to LARP.
My question was more like, this is how you build the idea of the edu-LARP, but how does it happen when you perform LARP?
Yeah, I think this is. I think I might answer this during the presentation. Okay, so when it comes to creating a LARP, you have different approaches. You can start from educational goal. You can say, okay, I'm trying to raise awareness about cancer, for example, or you can already have a LARP which has certain topics or has room for certain topics to be inserted into or are already there, and you can just draw from it and emphasize it and basically add in addition to it. So it's a really good idea to summarize your aim in one sentence. Do you maybe have any ideas that you want to already start working on? Yeah? Okay. Do you maybe have any ideas you're already thinking about? It can be just like an example as well. Okay.
So the thing that I have in my head is about language training. And one of the big problems in language is that you're afraid that you will be judged. You are afraid to practice the language because you constantly feel that people are laughing at you while you're talking because of your pronunciation or the structure of the sentence or a mistake that you made lexically. So if there is something that I want them to learn is the communication context, like create awareness for the communication context and give them the evergreen structures that work with language. It's not about knowing everything about present perfect, it's about knowing that it is about, you use it when you talk about experiences, like playing the game Have You Ever? And Never Have I Ever. So it's not one sentence, but yeah, that's the idea.
I think I now also better understand what you were asking before, because the example you specified, I could definitely put it under all three of the previous examples of the three aims, right? Because you want to give them the knowledge how to do something, you also want to build their skills, and you also want to raise awareness, hey, it's okay to not use it, well, to fail or...
It happens in a conversation, which is like initially creating the context for that.
Yeah, so you can definitely surf through all of this during the game. It is definitely up to you as a designer to decide how you want to do that. But these are sort of good to have in mind when you are designing something, so you know where to aim specifically. Do you have any other ideas or examples? Yeah, or like a topic.
So I have done kind of edu-LARP in terms of teaching search and rescue. So yeah, we have used edu-LARP, maybe not specifically designed as an edu-LARP, but it was kind of a simulation with teaching experience and learning experience for the people who participated. I'm not saying that it was LARP because people weren't aware that they're doing it, but the main goal was educational. So.
Yeah, that definitely works 100%. How would you summarize that maybe in one sentence of like, what's your main goal? What was your main goal with that?
Practical skills for context.
To teach them something, and in the meantime they don't know that they are learning. They don't realize that they're learning.
And the topic?
Well, our topic was search and rescue, so or disaster management, as you wish.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So thank you for these examples, because usually what I learned from like entrepreneurship or pitching and so on, it's usually really helpful if you try to summarize your idea in like one-liners. It not only, like sometimes it feels like you have to eliminate a lot, but it also helps you to stay on the track and focus a bit more. So when we are on the focus part, focus is the key in any LARP, especially educational LARP when you're actually trying to reach a certain goal. If you have one aim, it can make the LARP feel more focused, more efficient and clear. Because usually in a LARP setting, especially educational LARP setting, you would follow the structure of first having a workshop, then having the actual game, and then having a debriefing where you talk about the experience and so on. And it's usually much easier to address one thing, because LARPs usually can, even educational ones, they can last for 3 full days. We have one like that in Sweden, GIMLA-LARP. Or they can last for 1.5 hours. It doesn't really matter. But at the end of it, the biggest part for me personally is the debriefing. And it is really easy if you already know what you want people to debrief upon. So sometimes it's much easier if you have a specific aim from the start, and then you just focus on that one also in the debriefing. Because if you have more aims, it can make it a bit more complex and things can start intertwining. It's not a bad practice. There are no wrong focuses or wrong moves. It's just sometimes it can be more efficient. You also have the option to incorporate more aims into one game by, for example, creating groups of people that are having different focuses. So in Sweden, again, in GIMLA-LARP this year, we are, with a youth exchange, we're focusing on guilds, like building hard skills through entering a guild. It's a medieval fantasy setting. So essentially what people will be doing, what players will be doing, when they enter a guild, they will get specific aims. So if they will be in the guild of farmer, they will have specific aims, dig out the potatoes, or try to plant something, try to snip some of the plants so they will grow, try to figure these things out. Or if you're in the handicraft guild, you will obviously try to do things like weaving or blacksmithing and so on, and it's going to be much easier to debrief them if we split them into the groups for the debriefing as well. Because during the game they might be in different factions and everything, but at the end it's going to be much easier if they can stay on the point and actually talk about the main aspect of it. Do we have any comments or any ideas so far?
In my experience, at least for the edu-LARPs that we use, the main learning process comes with the debriefing. Like the thing that you said, that we have one thing in focus, but it is revealed during the debriefing process, like after the LARP. After they have like made some stuff, they have made some mistakes, and when we start to debrief them, they actually start to learn like how to avoid this thing in the future, for example.
Yeah, definitely. That's also why I'm always super excited about a debriefing, because it's the best thing that can happen to people after the game, because you obviously want to share stories anyhow, so the briefing only gives you a sort of a facilitated space to do so. So after focus, when you have the focus, you also, when we go back to the LARP structure, you always try to convey this focus into all of the building blocks of the game. Because you can, if you say, if you have, for example, climate crisis or climate action, you can obviously weave it into the story. It's post-apocalyptic, everything's falling apart, everything, like the power plants exploded long ago. It's bad, right? You can make a story that makes people feel that, like really feel that. But you can also do it with mechanics. In a different educational youth exchange, it was EDU. We had, each faction basically had like a, how do you call it, like a jug? A container filled with water for your own faction. And it was a very interesting experience because this water could be used as currency to buy food and everything, because players during the game didn't really get food. Obviously, if someone was depraved and hungry beyond reason, they could go eat. But in the game, the idea was that you were able to get food. You had to actually find the food in the game and buy it. And if you didn't have money, you could use water. And if you wanted to drink, you can use the water from the container. And believe it or not, nobody paid attention to the water until it was gone. Because we were all too involved in power struggles of politicians and politics of the little community we created between different tribes. So it was very educational when you look back at it, of like, okay, it was essentially a mechanic. Just the containers were there, right? And when one day mutants attacked and one of the containers got half empty, one of the factions was in really serious trouble all of a sudden. But it really nicely symbolized how you can convey such a message in an actual mechanic. Then you have characters. In characters, you can always incorporate it into the character design or like the focus with which you're building the characters themselves. For example, in this case, there could be steered facilitation of character creation. For example, what was your character doing before they felt the effects of climate change, and how did they react to it, for example? And this already sort of frames the player to think more in that regard when they're playing. And then you have the production, which can add a lot of immersion usually. And this is just an example of how you can sort of spill the whole focus over the building blocks. But yeah, so let's go forward. This is the part where we go deeper into the building blocks. So the story usually has setting, storyline, inciting incidents, and plot. And this is the moment when I want to sort of have you have this communication with you of what you think belongs into which category or what something describes. So does anyone want to sort of tackle the setting? What is the setting of a game? Or how can you make it educational? Yeah, it can be examples. So the setting usually, just to start it off, the setting is usually like a bigger picture that the game is actually taking place in. Let's say the setting can be a spaceship, or it can be a farm, or it can be 1931, or something like it. So how can you make it educational?
Well, for example, if you imagine a setting where you go to, let's say, a holiday, you end up in some shady city in some country, let's say Bulgaria. It's like it's like late in the evening, you're walking down. In the 90s, yes. It just becomes with elements of horror. Okay, so yeah, you're walking there, you're all alone, and you hear some steps behind you. The street is relatively dark, and
just got your salary.
And yes, that as well. And you suddenly like remember that people always told you that it's not a good idea to walk alone in dark places, etc., etc., etc. And I would use this setting for initial story for LARP that I will use to teach you how to avoid, let's say, places and certain places, and I'll teach you like self-defense, for example. But in order to teach you self-defense, I first need to introduce you like to the setting, to the area, and to the risks that can come with that.
You can also make that about figuring out gender stereotypes. There is a mythical creature in Bulgaria which is called Samudiva, and she lurks into the dark and kills man because she's just purely evil because she's a female. You can, you can make it mythologically based if you and explore the relationship between you who maybe will be killed, or the Samudiva who maybe will kill you, or maybe you can communicate.
Yes, thank you for these amazing examples, quite scary examples, but very to the point, definitely. So a story can do a lot to engage players' minds. That's essentially, in my opinion, often the point of the story.
Usually when the story is like, usually in my experience, when the story is like closer to reality or to someone that maybe to something that you experience like on regular basis, it makes it much easier to introduce ideas. Like, because sometimes you said, imagine we're on a spaceship. When we are talking about edu-LARPs, I would say that my idea will be that usually I'll be using them for non-LARPers. So these people, they don't have the idea of like going in character, and some stuff are maybe very difficult to introduce. Like, imagine we're on a spaceship. For example, we can play, for example, Tau Ceti, like right here, and it's doable. But if we take like 5 people from the street, it won't be as easy for them to just take this setting and storyline and use it. And that's why in certain cases, I would use something which is like borderline realistic, as much realistic as possible, in order to introduce some idea. Because people will make no effort of like imagining something that is not around them.
Yeah, that definitely comes down back to the whole which target audience you have. Because if obviously you have LARPers or people you have the time to prepare and they're actually excited to enter a game, you can take a very different approach than if you have people who are taken from the streets or are maybe just not really forced to be there, but you know, like it's mandatory attendance or something like it. It varies so much, and I don't yet personally have an answer to how to address all of these different situations from practice, but definitely there are big differences in that. So you also should be mindful for whom you're definitely designing this game. Yeah, so this is essentially, in your examples, you have mentioned all of the above. So setting, storyline, inciting, incident, and plot. But what I would like to focus your attention on is that when you are making a game, usually you have the first thing. So you have the setting where it's happening. How did you say, like 90s Bulgaria, dark street at night. And then you have the storyline, which players usually don't know. It's a secret from the GMs. It holds a lot of educational potential. And in that case, it would be this, how did you call it? Samudiva. Yeah, this mythical creature that lurks there and comes there and you have to defend yourself against. But obviously players wouldn't probably from the start know about it. Maybe they would be briefed about knowing the story, among others, and so on. But then you would also, when you start the game, you would have the inciting incident. So why are these people there? Like, what's so different from the usual that it's worth role-playing at that moment? So in that case, it would be probably, you usually never are out at night because you know it's dangerous, but this time you had no other way. You had to be out at night. And now you're just walking around waiting for something to jump on you because you know all of these myths. Or you're maybe just strolling down the lane and you just think to yourself, that's all just stories of the past, right? But so you have this enticing incident there to sort of kickstart the whole story of the game. And then you have plot. I personally try to divide storyline and plot, usually, because storyline is somehow, I see it as a more overarching theme. And then you have plot, which is a very concrete thing. So under plot, I would usually say when you have an educational goal or a topic, that, like self-defense, I would try to, when I'm talking about a plot, you can also talk about a scenario book, plot book, and so on. You write down these encounters, which basically make sure that your story gets to the player. Because if you just create this story, you can also just hope for the best. You can put an NPC, like a player there, and hope that the actual player playing the monster will attack them at one point. Or you can somehow make sure that that happens. You say, okay, you have to get your key from that location, or this is the only door that is unlocked, sort of a thing. And then you know where the players are going to be, and you can create something alongside of encounters and so on. It can be very flashy, or it can be very subliminal, if you know what I mean by that. Like very obvious or very not obvious for them at first. You can really play with these things. So, do we have any comments on this? Do we want to move on? Is this clear for you, what I mean with the story now? Okay. So let's then move on to the mechanics. Mechanics, usually I would advise you, at least from the beginning, when you're designing games, go for something that's simple, that's not too complex, because if players need to learn too much of a mechanic, there are chances, like if a mechanic, let's say a spell or something, or like to defeat this monster that attacks you, has like 10 different steps, players will forget certain steps. That's inevitable because we are humans. And if you want to make it, let's say, foolproof or bulletproof, you actually want to create something that is quite simple for players to grasp as mechanic, because mechanics are something that players will learn before the game. It is the physics of the game, you have to know them in order to be able to play the game. When I say efficient mechanics, what I mean with that is also that you try to make them on the point. So often when you're designing a game, you get really enamored by some idea. Oh my God, there could be this really cool thing that would be flashing when you touch it, and that would mean something. And then after 2 days, you're like, but actually, it doesn't really convey the thing I needed to convey. So just try to sort of circle back to these ideas that when you're creating the game, and rethink them after a few days, and see how they are faring up with the rest of the story, how they are, if they actually do the point they need to do. Then I'm saying understandable, make mechanics understandable, because players, it's often a lot of information for people. So if you make it understandable and easy to grasp, you have better chances of players understanding your game and playing it. And yes, mechanics can also be super abstract. I've been in a LARP where there was a piece of paper on which it said pistol or food. This is a very abstract representation of something. But that's okay, because sometimes you don't need high production. We're going to get to that. But sometimes also mechanics can be super abstract. Sometimes it can... Do you have any ideas of what could be like a very abstract mechanic, perhaps? There are no wrong answers here also.
Rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, rock, paper, scissors. That can definitely also resolve. It can be a conflict resolution mechanic. Sometimes you want to have fights which are actually going to be physical in a sense of self-defense. That would be very useful, for example. But in a sense where this is not the actual aim, or you want to make it somehow safer for people, or you're just going for something for a different point of the game and you don't want people to focus too much on the fighting and tactics, you can totally use rock, paper, scissors. It works well. I've also heard about the Vampire LARP, where they were sort of how much skill you had. It was shown at the start of the combat, so it was a duel, by how you stood. If you stood like this, it meant you are on the lowest skill level. If you were like this, it already, meant that you have some skill. But if you were like this or something, like a more movie poses, it already meant that it was even that you were at a very high skill level. Yes.
We had we had this also Vampire LARP where the skills level was shown by fingers. So for example, invisibility, it was like level 1, 2, 3. And then if you have level 1 and somebody has level 2, then they can see you and stuff like that.
Yeah, that is also an excellent example because sometimes it's hard to make yourself invisible. So these abstract mechanics are sometimes useful. Hmm? Yeah, just sometimes. Usually it works. You can just become invisible if you want to. Yeah, for the rare cases in which you cannot, you can use abstract mechanics. And my tip here would be workshop these mechanics. At least the core mechanics of the game. Try to really pay attention to it, and even if people read it before the game, just take 10 minutes or 15 minutes, however long it takes, make sure people know how to use it and are comfortable using it, because that will also create a safe space. I've had a few times where even I'm LARPing for 6 years, so I should be sort of comfortable with things, but there were certain mechanics that were just so out of my comfort zone or really stressed me out so much that I did not want to use them. But then I went to a game where there was such a mechanics that I was slightly worried about, and they workshopped it. And afterwards, I was like, oh yeah, I know how to use it, it's fine. So it's really important that you make people feel comfortable when they're learning things like that as well. Do we have any comments here or questions? We can also circle back to it later if you find any questions. So let's go to the characters. So when it comes to characters, there are, I think, based on my thoughts, sort of 3 different aspects to it. There are obviously characters themselves, there is relations between the characters, and there are activities that these people will be doing. And all of this can either be pre-written, you can leave it up to players to figure it out during the game themselves or before the game. Often in LARP there is this idea of, I as an organizer give you a structure, a setting, and you create your own character. It doesn't matter. But in educational LARPs, often it's good to have at least some sort of a facilitated guide how to develop the characters. They can also be workshopped. There are numerous shorter LARPs where you can essentially just come without any preparation. And when you're there, you workshop your character very easily. There are really cool methods from different games. And they can also be added during. So let's say that when we talk about activities, you can either at the start of the game have a certain faction that has specific goals come to you and you workshop with them, okay, so what are the specific activities you can do as a character in this faction? It opens up the possibilities and the ideas, which is often really valuable. But you can also do this as quests during the game. So for example, people, all of a sudden there can be a quest, so go defeat the evil monster, I don't know, something along those lines, or go find a specific treasure or something like it if you're feeling piratey. Go Yes, exactly. Go communicate with the monster, but first you need to learn the language. That can also be a really interesting quest. So do we have any questions here or any ideas, comments? Hello. Oh, no worries, sit down. Okay, so then let's go to the last building block, production. So you can often go for simulation. Usually it's called 360 LARPs, where you have everything around you make sense for the setting and the game you're in. Nothing is out of place, as in 360 LARP from a Western movie or something like it, inspired by that. It wouldn't have phones or something like it, unless it's a sci-fi Western, for example. But the point of this is to basically make it feel like you're actually in that world with everything you see around yourself. You also can have representations in the production. So when I spoke before about having a piece of paper and on it written apples or food or something like it, this is a representation. It's like an abstract version of what you can do. And sometimes this is completely enough. If you have a game which doesn't require full-on costumes, 360 immersion and everything, it's completely fine to just use some simpler props, because the players can get the point out of them as well. Like the example I told before with how do you call them? With the water? Yes, water jugs, things. So then they could also, the organizers could opt for actually building wells or, you know, like pools with water and all of that. But that obviously costs a lot of money and takes a lot of production time and everything. So they opted just for giving us jugs of water, and it worked perfectly. It worked exactly the same. It was actually even better because it symbolized all the water reservoirs we could have in all different separate locations. So these are all the possibilities you could do with that. And then always ask yourself how much is actually needed. Do I need players to have actual, like, full-on costumes? Sometimes no, sometimes yes. It really depends from what you're going after. Usually it is, not gonna say the rule, but usually it does sort of go together that the bigger production, like the better production, the more quality of production, the bigger immersion, it doesn't necessarily follow this rule. I've been to LARPs where there were minimal things and you got so into it that you were just in that world. But often, if you want to create more immersion, usually at least some props or some level of production is good. Like if you want people to, for example, be in a bunker and have limited amount of resources, you can also just go buy that little food packets and actually place them there. And this is already, we're talking about production here. Yes?
Conference tables, put them together and people can crawl under it. There is a Polish LARP that, and that's exactly in the bunker they are terrified.
So they are, in the Polish LARP, they are symbolizing a bunker by putting tables together.
All the tables that we are in
Yeah.
this room together, and people have to walk on their knees, and there is a bunker under the tables. They cannot go outside the bunker because they die.
That is probably surprisingly effective way of making people feel they are in the bunker when they have to crawl.
Black stretch around.
The black fabric around, yeah.
Or a foil, black sketch.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a total black table.
So yes, those are all very efficient methods. Again, just figure out what works for your game that you're trying to, and your point that you're trying to convey. Because in my opinion, in edu-LARPs, it's all about the point you're trying to convey. Some points need bigger production, need pre-written characters, need a bit more complicated mechanics, and some LARPs can be equally as efficient if they don't have that. If they have simpler mechanics, if they have tables put together. And things like that. One tip regarding production is that in LARPs, it's usually a very... LARPs are something you usually do with people in a closed space, not space as in building, but a closed company, let's call it, so that there are no onlookers and just random people walking by. In my experience, this really disturbs the whole idea of it. We even had in one park in Berlin, we were having an edu-LARP, and we were really into our faction play. And all of a sudden, we realized we were standing next to the fence, and in this park, people were just walking by, and they were looking at us like, why are you dressed post-apocalyptically and weird and painted all over? They did not comment, or maybe even if they did, it was in German. I don't speak German, so... But it was, I noticed the mood really shift. So try to make sure that when you're doing these kind of things, you are creating a safe space, not only for the people themselves, but also from other people who could just innocently barge in and just disturb the whole process. Sometimes it can literally kill the whole mood, or sometimes it can even contribute to it, but if you have that specific design. Okay. Move. Yes, okay. You have questions?
I just wanted to say something about the safe space thing.
Yes.
So we were playing. Can I just hold it and like pretend to speak into it, or do I have to? Oh, okay. So we were actually playing a game about what you said about the safe space. If there are different groups of players in the game, I think it's also it's important to present a safe space for different groups too. We were once playing a game with different communities. We represented different post-apocalyptic communities, and then we had like hippies and this like religious sect, and we were playing this community that was really rabid. Mm-hmm. We were really animalistic, and so at one point we were supposed to like mix, and other groups were so terrified because we started jumping on them. So maybe it's also like important to create a safe space for the groups themselves, since not everybody can. For example, when you were talking about guilds, maybe one group is going to be normalized with something, but the other groups are still going to be kind of weirded out about it. So it's important to maybe also have that in mind. Yeah. I honestly forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, okay, sorry.
If you remember, please tell me. But yeah, definitely, that's a very interesting point that you made. It is often a really good practice to enable safe spaces even during the game, unless you want to creep people out by design. If you want to make them feel uncomfortable at all times. But if that's not your aim, that's a really good proposition to definitely try to enable safe spaces for most people. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm just gonna speed run through some case studies now. If you have any questions or anything, yeah? Sorry, was there a question? No. Okay, so if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. And yes, no breaks, sorry, but it's gonna be okay. Okay, so I have 3 types of, let's say, edu-LARPs ready for you. And the first one is Erasmus plus youth exchanges. On the pictures, you can, almost see how it looks like. So the workshops were made in this sort of setting like we are in, just a normal, regular setting. And then below you can actually see us during the game. It was a post-apocalyptic setting, and yes, okay, so but what are youth exchanges? So they are sort of this week, approximately a week-long mobilities for youth financed by European Union. And they are usually aimed at exploring a certain specific topic. They have educational goals. Some can be very visible, like you can inform participants, okay, so we're gonna be doing things about authenticity, but sometimes you can also have some things that are hidden from them, because these things can then later on, you can address them again in the debriefing, for example, and it can be very impactful because players were not thinking about it, but then when you can look back at it, you're like, oh my God, actually that was the case and this was the most educational part for me. Because I was not being aware of that, but it happened, and now that I reflect on it, this is how it goes, for example. Usually the process is you are applying for projects, you have an idea, you apply for it to your national agency, and then you get accepted or denied, but let's say you get accepted. Then you start with the participant selection, and usually there are different countries involved. There are sending organizations to the host organization, and they select participants, then you have preparation, then the mobility takes place, people travel, and the youth travels to the host venue. There are usually workshops on this specific topic, and preparations for the LARP itself, because yes, as we established before, you usually have to prepare people to LARP. And then of course LARP happens. It can be in little tiny, how to call it? Modules, but it can also be like a 3-day experience, for example. The important part is that then you do the debriefing. Sometimes you can do the debriefing after 1 day, or like this little module. Let's say that you have a 2-hour LARP, and then you do the debriefing, and then the next day you can even run a different LARP with a similar point of view, or just to explore a different part of the same problem. So debriefing is really, really good thing here. And the pictures are coming from the post-apocalyptic EDU-LARP. Then these pictures that you can see are from the Swedish Gimle EDU-LARP. You can also see the comparison of the topics and sort of a setting. So while EDU was in post-apocalyptic tribes making a society setting with mutants attacking you, EDU was medieval fantasy with a lot of trading and communities and cultural mixing, for example. And you can also see that this setting really inspired the whole idea of what the educational aims of each youth exchanges were, because while post-apocalyptic EDU had immigrants, deradicalization, climate action, democracy topics, which are really fitting into that sort of setting, Gimle had leadership, nature survival, risk management, authenticity, and practical skills, which are the guilds that I was mentioning for this year. Do we have any comments or questions here? And you're getting the mic.
Okay. I was wondering, this is maybe not really like specific for now, but I was wondering where we can find, so I'm usually going to a lot of youth exchanges, but I have problems finding specifically like edu-LARPs, because I'm not sure whether I don't know where to look for, or if the edu-LARPs are not so common or something, but do you maybe know where I can find them and apply to them, please?
Yes, definitely. We can help you with that. You have a lot of different organizations here. In this room, you have at least 3 organizations that I know of, 4 organizations that are dealing with edu-LARPs. So you have... there will be options. Another run of the EDU-LARP is happening in Berlin this year. But usually... September, yeah. But so, you know what, you contact me and I can direct you, or you just speak to people around you and they will tell you a lot of different organizations.
Yeah, that is kind of the issue with LARPing. There is an issue with LARPing, like it's a very closed society. Like you need to know the right people in order to get to the nice places and get the nice experience. So do you... Okay, personally participating in LARPs for the past 8 years, whatever the amount of years, and also participating in edu-LARPs. Do you think that it's possible for this to become more mainstream in the future? Do you think that you can have like an official site for like LARPing and get all of the information that you need there?
Yeah, I definitely feel this problem really like vividly myself. I really don't like when people are gatekeeping something, and I feel like that this, in LARP community, in some communities it might have been gatekeeping, but in general it's just, it was not gatekeeping by intent, it was just sort of, it happened because it's a very niche hobby still. I definitely have all the trust that this will develop into something much more for mainstream, and we are actually working on it with my own organization, Zavod Erea, inspired by Nausicaa. Zavod Erea. Yeah, it will be at the end of presentation anyhow, but we are definitely trying to push these boundaries, and when we are searching for participants to send to these youth exchanges, we are reaching out to different youth organizations. We are not saying, okay, you 5 are going because we know you're from LARP community. We actually sort of pride ourselves in taking different people each year. So we try to... Yes. Yes, we do work with different organizations. A lot of them are in this room again. How is your organization? LARP Bulgaria, then we have Nausicaa, Parallel Worlds. Do we have any other edu-LARP organizations in the room? Can you repeat it, please? Yes. Yes, and Zavod Erea from Slovenia. Thank you. Please. You will also see it written on the beautiful board here.
No, it's like the thing that she says about the mechanics, like simple is better.
We reached the parallel worlds, but it will be taken.
Okay. So we are slowly running out of time, but let me try to speed through this, and then we can please have a lovely and lively discussion. A different form of also youth edu-LARPs are, you can find in educational institutes. For example, in Slovenia, we have one such, it is called Kersnikova Institute. It is all about non-formal learning. It is meant usually for children. It combines art and science. They do not, by default, involve LARP, but by us being there, they are starting to. And they had a very successful run with sort of a workshop with LARP elements for kids, and it turned out great. Sadly, our friend Bibi is not here. They would know how to... Bibi. I can give you contact, yes. Okay, yeah, you know, okay. So yeah, Bibi is running that part of Kersnikova. Okay, so the point here is that it is not specifically a LARP. Usually it is more like LARP elements being used, and I believe this is also something that goes for the edu-LARP in business environments. Usually it can be a LARP, but it can also just use LARP elements, right? It's a spectrum of sorts. It usually has the most, from what we've seen so far from experience, the most you can do is with the actual setting, so people and children can go into it and really immerse themselves into it. And often it has this idea that can be really well communicated through this, it's stepping into other people's shoes or learning certain skills. Any questions or comments here? These are just examples of what there can be. Okay. Then let me go to the last slide. And then you also have the form of LARP scenarios. And this is a practice we have adopted from Nausicaa from Poland. It is called LARP Days. And we are really happy to do them in Slovenia because basically we take LARP scenarios that are from the internet. Obviously, you always cite the authors and everything. But most of them are, or at least a lot of them, are out there just free to use, for you to run, because people like designing LARPs, and so you can also make things easy for yourself and just go online and find a LARP scenario that is on the topic you want. I have really cool examples we actually run here. One is Move. It is from Antonios Triantafilakis. He will probably murder me for butchering his name. You can find him on the conference as well. But it is about climate catastrophe, and it was sort of a mix about this sort of, it was half concrete LARP. So you could have post-apocalyptic clothes, but the point of it was, most of it was on the story and the production of actual things you had to do. It was a very interesting LARP, and I warmly invite you to play it. Another LARP is called Lugubrious Day at Work. Sadly, I was unable to find the authors of it, but I believe if you Google it or ask me later on, I will gladly tell you. It is, from how we ran it, a lot of times already, we usually used it for addressing racism and queerness because they do this really fun thing. They take this really heavy topic and they just put it into the constant problem and discussion we have, are you a cat or a dog person or a dog lover, right? So basically, imagine you being born in a world where your pet is the one that defines your qualities and your worth. But you can't choose your pet, the pet chooses you. So you're just born there, and then maybe a dog or a cat chooses you. But we all know in that world, of course, that a dog is, the people who own dogs are just really cool, they're loyal, they're nice, they're chill about things, they're good friends. But people who own cats, not that well. So it's taking this really heavy concept and making it into something super lightweight. It's fun to play, right? Who doesn't want to play something fun like hating on cat people? Like, it's just so fun. Or I see your face, no, it's just a LARP, it's an educational LARP, okay? No, but it's a design of the game, and it was very fun to play it. So I also warmly invite you to use these LARPs, and also plenty other that are out there for you to use, just as they are already. So this concludes my presentation, and thank you from our side. So we are already a bit over the time. Okay. So I will be taking questions Yes, I will be taking questions personally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya. I hope that it was possible to demystify a little bit edu-LARPs. I think they are a very, very important genre, so thank you for this workshop and for this invitation. And we will continue very soon with our next keynote speaker. Thank you.
We can ask you guys to help us with the resetting of the room. We'd like to come back to the